be. And so when others are mistreating you, you have to confidently walk in the identity that the Lord has given you. Because you can't become accustomed to what somebody else wants you to do. And you'll know if you are walking what the Lord has called you to do because it's in the Word of God. It's not something that you're creating on your own. But you have to make sure that you are not conforming to be someone that someone else wants you to be, but you have to be who God has called you to be. And so we have to sometimes go through that pain. It says in this world we will have trouble, but it hurts sometimes worse when that trouble and that pain comes from our family members, the people that are supposed to love us, the people that are supposed to stick with us. It takes an unselfish person to be able to move forward in that family unit and press through those things. But sometimes we're so selfish and we want what we want, just like Jacob, he wanted the other sister. He wanted what he wanted and then he took it out on the other girl. Some people want what they want, and because they want something just because it looks good or sounds good or feels good, that's not what the Lord wants them to do. And so you can't conform to what someone else wants you to do. There's an and, work through the and. So you may be crying, but and the Lord sees you. You may be hurt, and the Lord sees you. You may be by yourself, and the Lord sees you. You may feel lonely, and the Lord sees you. They may be talking about you, and the Lord sees you. And so you have to remember that you are in this with the Lord. Don't allow someone else to identify you. Be who God has called for you to be. Don't let someone mistreat you because of who you're not. Don't try to be someone that you're not just because someone else is mistreating you. You are who God called you to be. And sometimes we only want the thing that looks good. Because the other sister, Rachel, she looked good. She was beautiful, the text says, and favored. But Leah had weak eyes. And so sometimes we want that thing that looks good, but God has something else in store. And so sometimes God, remember last week God gave Jacob the promise. He gave him a promise that he will be fruitful, they will have that land. Well, sometimes we want our promise to come through the thing that looks good to us. But the promise comes through who God selects. And so just because someone is mistreating you doesn't mean you're not going to get the promise. Does not mean that you don't have purpose. But you have to move through that knowing who you are in Christ. Because God is ultimately in control. And when you begin to redefine yourself to who other people want you to be, then you can't be who God called you to be. So remember, hatred doesn't stop anything. It didn't stop anything with them. It doesn't stop anything with us today. And it's not going to stop anything with us in the future as long as we stay aligned with Him. So again in 31 it says, and the Lord saw that Leah was hated. So hatred doesn't stop anything. We must work through an and. But we have to remember that God sees us. God chose her just like He chose us. He sees what we're going through. He knows all. And sometimes I think that we forget who God is and what He's capable of. Because we begin to try to take control of our own life and our own situation. But sometimes we have to begin to let things play out on its own and allow God to do His work while we are continually trusting in Him. Things may not always look right, things may not feel right, but God sees what's going on. You are not forgotten. Just like He did not forget about Leah, He did not forget about you. Just like He loved her, He loved you. Nothing can separate us from the love of God. And so remember, any hatred that comes toward you, regardless of who it is from, and again, I'm not going to discredit it, because when it comes from family, it really, really hurts. But God loves you. He will always love you. He has always loved you, so much so that He gave His Son before we were even connected to Him. And so we have to remember that God sees everything. And so while it may sometimes look like the other person is winning and looking like they're victorious, and they may even feel like they are in it to win it and doing the right thing and on top, God is in control. God is in control. He sees you. Sometimes our current life situations don't match the promises of God, and so we'll want to turn around or we'll want to begin to handle things on our own. But remember, hatred doesn't stop anything. Sometimes people's feelings are in control of everything that they see and do, and so they're not seeing and doing things clearly. But remember, God sees you. He loves you. He has prepared you. He created you for a purpose. You are here for a reason. So regardless of how anyone treats you, mother, father, sister, brother, wife, husband, cousin, grandparent, regardless of how anyone treats you, God sees you and He loves you. And He is in control of everything. And you will come out victorious as long as you stay aligned with Him. So let's look at 32, the end of it. It says, Leah was hated, and he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. And Leah conceived and bare a son, and she called his name Reuben. For she said, surely the Lord hath looked upon my affliction, therefore my husband will love me. So when hatred doesn't stop anything, we have to work through an and. We have to know that God sees us, but then we have to know that God opens production. Hatred may cause hurt and pain, but hatred also causes favor. Although she was hated by her husband, God allowed her to have something that the favored wife did not have at that point in time. And so although people are treating us wrong, although people are doing us dirty, that does not mean that you cannot produce what God has called you to produce. It does not mean that you cannot function and produce the fruit of your life, because you can still have peace. You can still have joy. You can still be kind. You can still forgive, although other people are treating you wrong. It does not take away from that because other people are doing you wrong. But the thing I want you to recognize here is she realized that it was God that had saw her and God that had given it to her. So when that does happen, we can't forget about God. We have to recognize that it is God that is in control, because He's the one that opens us up to be able to produce the things that He has called for us to produce. And so regardless of what someone else is doing, regardless of how they are treating us, God is ultimately in control, and that does not define what you can or cannot do. And so you may be hurting, and you may be crying, and you may be sad, and the other person may look victorious, but I tell you and I guarantee that God is ultimately in control. Remember, the promise that God made was to Jacob. And this is on the flip side of it. Sometimes God makes us a promise, and so when He makes us a promise, we begin to picture things how we want it. But then He begins to send people and things, and we're like, no, that's not my style. That's not really what I want. And so we begin to push back on the promise. But then we begin to wonder, when is the promise coming? We don't recognize that the promise is already there. But because it doesn't look the way that we want it to look, it doesn't feel the way that we want it to feel, then we are pushing away the thing that God has sent. And so there are times in our lives where we are pushing away and pushing away and pushing away, because we want to reach for something that looks better to us, or that feels better to us, or is an easier process to us, because we don't like process, we don't like to have to persevere, we don't like to have faith. We like to just be able to get it and it's there, boom. And so we begin to push away from the thing that God has sent us, from the people that God has sent us to help us. The people that God has sent us for us to love us. We begin to push those people away because, again, we want to be in control of our own lives. But when we do that, we will find ourselves going in a downward spiral. Because it may seem like we're winning on one end, but when God is in control and you are outside of His will, it is not going to succeed. And then you're hurting the people that's in the family that you're supposed to be helping, the people that you're supposed to be loving. 9 times out of 10, they're hurting internally and not saying anything, but you'll be able to see it in their actions at times. But we have to recognize that what God is sending us is not always going to look the way that we want it to look. It's not always going to be that picture perfect thing that we dream about. It's not always going to be like someone else has it. And it's so important because the family is that unit that should be able to come together regardless of what your family consists of. So whatever your family consists of, it should be able to come together and love. It should be able to come together and forgive. It should be able to come together and have joy. It should be able to come together and cry. It should be able to come together and encourage. But there's so much selfishness in the family. Everybody's thinking about I, that we don't recognize that we are pushing God away. And so we have to get to the point that no, we have to recognize hatred does not stop anything unless we let it. We don't let it by responding to God's word. It's not enough to know God's word. We have to respond to God's word. It's not enough to say, this person is doing me wrong and I know what God's words say, but I don't believe it. We have to believe it and walk in it. Because if we don't, then we'll allow that hatred to tear us down and tear us down and tear us down and tear us down. And sometimes people don't just say they hate you. They may never say they hate you, but their actions show it. That's the worst. Because they treat you bad. And you'll be able to tell because you'll see them interact with other people, and they're just, whoo, and then they get with you, and it's And so we have to, and I think it's so important to know that this was family. This was not friends. This was family. And I believe us in the family, we're hurting each other. We're hurting each other badly. But God wants us to love each other. And he wants us also to know that if our family has hurt us, he still loves us. And he wants us to show them that same love. Because notice she said now that she had the baby or was going to have a baby, maybe my husband will love me now. She didn't push him away even though he hated her. She still wanted that love. And so we have to get to the place to where we are recognizing the love of God. It's selfless. It is selfless. It is selfless. It is not all about me, 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 me. It is selfless. And until we get to that place, let me pause. I'm not just talking about your blood family, church family. Same thing with the church family. I should be able to cry with Peaches. I should be able to go with Peaches. We do, y'all. I should be able to go to Peaches and express my concern. If I have a concern, if I'm hurting about something, I should be able to call her. But the church, and I'm talking about the church universal, the church is so divided and so disconnected and so selfish that we don't even recognize it. We ought to love each other. We cannot mimic the world. We cannot. And the world hates, but God loves. So my question to you this morning is, which will you choose? Love or hate? Amen? Amen.